The rain battered the cafe windows, a relentless drum that drowned out the murmur of strangers' conversations. I sat alone at a corner table, the bitter steam of my coffee curling upward, my fingers tracing the worn edge of a book I hadn't opened. It was a Thursday, unremarkable, a moment of stolen peace in a life I'd fought to make steady. Then the door swung open, and there she was, Claire, my sister, her silhouette framed against the gray light, her coat soaked through, raindrops clinging to her hair like tears. My pulse spiked, a jolt that burned through the calm I'd cultivated over a decade. I hadn't seen her since I was 18, when I walked away from our fractured home, swearing I'd never let its shadows touch me again. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this city, not in the quiet refuge I'd carved out 500 miles from our past. Yet her eyes, scanning the crowded room, found mine, and the weight of her gaze pinned me to my chair. My hands trembled, coffee sloshing in its cup, as a storm of emotions, rage, fear, a flicker of something tender, threatened to unravel me. Just weeks ago, I'd uncovered proof in our mother's attic, letters that exposed Claire, my childhood protector, as a keeper of our father's darkest secrets. She'd helped him conceal his cruelty, leaving me to bear its scars. Now, steps away, her posture hesitant, her fingers twisting the strap of her bag, she seemed poised to bridge the chasm between us. I could stay, hear whatever truth or excuse she carried, or I could walk away, preserving the fragile boundaries I'd built. Was it strength to protect my heart, or cowardice to reject the sister who once held my world together? Claire's presence was a knife, slicing through the years I'd spent burying our history. Growing up, she was my anchor, 5 years older, her laughter a beacon in a house where joy was a stranger. I'd trail her like a shadow, clinging to her warmth as she braided my hair or slipped me candy from her pocket. She'd shield me when our father's whiskey-soaked rages erupted, her body a barrier between me and his fists. But there were other moments, ones I couldn't reconcile, when she'd stand by his side, her head bowed, her voice silent as he tore into me for some imagined slight. I'd catch her in the hallway, her eyes averted, slipping into his study to whisper words I couldn't hear. Those memories, sharp as glass, cut deeper now, colored by the attic's revelations. The letters, their ink faded but their weight crushing, showed Claire had been more than a bystander. She'd helped our father hide nights I'd never forget, nights like the one at 12, when I shivered in the garage, locked out in the cold, my breath fogging the window as I waited for someone to care. She'd known, had chosen to bury his sins, and the sting of her disloyalty reshaped every memory of her protection. Yet in the cafe, her eyes held a plea, a tremor of guilt or desperation I couldn't parse. Was she here to mend what she'd broken, or to drag me back into the chaos I'd escaped? I'd spent a decade rebuilding, stitching together a life where trust wasn't a gamble. Therapy had taught me to name the trauma that lingered in my bones, to recognize the child who'd learned love could turn to treachery. A steady job, a partner who saw me whole, a city far from that house, these were my victories, hard-won and fiercely guarded. But Claire's sudden appearance cracked that foundation, stirring a longing I'd buried. I remembered her at 17, her face drawn, taking the blame for a broken dish to spare me our father's wrath. Was that sacrifice, or a lie to keep his favor? The letters suggested the latter, their cold, ink deceptions painting her as his ally, not mine. Yet her presence now, fragile and uncertain, challenged that truth. Could she have been protecting me in ways I didn't see, a child herself, caught in the same storm? My body screamed to flee, to shield the peace I'd earned, but my heart hesitated, tethered to the sister who'd once been my everything. The choice loomed, heavy as the rain outside. Stay and risk reopening wounds, or walk away and lose her forever. Is forgiveness a gift to her, or a deception of the self I've fought to become? Can you rebuild trust with someone who broke it, or is the past a door better left locked? And if I turn her away, am I free, or am I just another piece of our family's wreckage, drifting alone? The air in my childhood home was a choking fog, thick with the acrid bite of whiskey and the gray haze of my mother's chain-smoked cigarettes. The walls, stained yellow from years of neglect, trembled with the echo of shouted curses, and the floors creaked under footsteps that carried the weight of dread. Every corner held the threat of my father's wrath, a storm that could erupt without warning, sparked by a misplaced spoon, a late dinner, or nothing at all. I was 8 when I realized other families didn't live like this, didn't hold their breath at the clink of a bottle or the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. His voice was a thunder that shook my bones, his eyes wild with a rage I couldn't comprehend, his hands delivering punishment for sins I couldn't name. My mother, slumped in her frayed armchair, was a specter in her own house, her gaze vacant as she flicked ash into an overflowing tray. Her silence was a wall, a passive cruelty that left me and Claire, 5 years my senior, to navigate the chaos alone. Claire was my sanctuary, a flickering light in a house shrouded in fear. 5 years older, she carried a strength I clung to, her presence a fragile promise that I wouldn't face the storm alone. When shouts erupted, she'd guide me to the basement, her hand steady around mine, her stories weaving a fragile shield against the violence above. At night, in the dim glow of her room, she'd braid my hair, her fingers gentle, her rare laughter a warmth that eased the cold knot in my chest. I'd curl against her, believing her strength could hold the world at bay. She'd slip me candy from her pocket, small acts of rebellion against the house's misery, and I'd worship her for it, my big sister who seemed to know how to survive. But there were moments when that light wavered, when her loyalty seemed to fracture. I'd see her in the kitchen, her posture rigid, nodding as our father ranted, her eyes flicking to me with a shadow I couldn't decipher. She'd slip into his study, their hushed exchanges seeping through the door, and a sting of treachery would pierce me. Was she siding with him, trading my safety for his approval? The question lingered, sharp and unanswered, even as she pulled me close, her arms a fleeting fortress. One winter night, at 12, I learned the depth of his cruelty. A careless spill, juice staining the carpet, unleashed his fury. He dragged me to the garage, the door slamming shut, the cold biting my skin as I pressed against the frosted window, my breath clouding the glass. Hours stretched, my fingers numb, my heart pounding with the hope of rescue. When he finally relented, Claire was there, her face pale, her hands trembling as she wrapped me in a blanket. I clung to her, believing she'd fought for me, but a seed of doubt took root. Other moments piled on, each a crack in my trust. At 10, I broke a lamp, a clumsy accident, and Claire stepped forward, her voice steady as she took the blame, her eyes averted as he berated her. I thought it was love, but later wondered if it was strategy. At 11, I hid in a closet, my knees pulled tight, as he stormed through the house over a bad day at work. Claire found me, her face drawn, and sat with me in silence, but the next day, I saw her linger by his side, her silence louder than his shouts. School offered no escape. At 13, I forgot a homework assignment, and he humiliated me in front of my teacher, his voice cutting as he called me useless. Claire was there, waiting outside, her expression unreadable, and she walked me home without a word. I wanted her to fight for me, to tell him he was wrong, but her silence felt like complicity. Another time, at 15, I tried to tell a counselor about the shouting, the fear, but my mother's cold stare and Claire's quick glance silenced me. The counselor dismissed my halting words, and I learned that help was a risk I couldn't afford. Claire's presence in those moments, sometimes protective, sometimes distant, blurred the line between ally and accomplice. Was she shielding me, or preserving the fragile balance of our home? Her actions, like the house itself, were a maze of contradictions. By 16, I was counting days until escape, my heart hardening against the family that had shaped me. At 18, I fled to college, 500 miles away, severing ties with my parents and keeping Claire at a distance. Her letters and calls went unanswered, her connection to that house too painful to bear. I built a life free of its shadows, a world where I could breathe without bracing for impact. But last year, after our mother's death, I returned to face the remnants of that life. The attic was a claustrophobic tomb, its air thick with dust and memory. Among cobwebs and forgotten boxes, I found a bundle of letters, their ink faded but their words a fresh wound. Written by my father to Claire, they praised her for her silence, for upholding the family's facade through years of his cruelty. One mentioned that night in the garage, noting I was too young to know the truth she'd helped conceal, a truth that included his violence, her complicity. Another referenced smaller moments, like the lamp incident, where she'd shouldered his anger to keep the peace. The weight of her disloyalty crushed the trust I'd once placed in her, reshaping every memory of her care. She'd known his sins, had shielded them, and I was left to carry their scars. Yet even as I read, a question gnawed, sharp and unyielding. At 17, was she a traitor, or a child caught in the same wreckage, trying to save us both in a way I couldn't see? The letters offered no answers, only fragments of a truth I wasn't ready to face. Claire's face that night in the garage pale, haunted, flashed in my mind, and I wondered if her trembling hands held more than fear. Had she been sacrificing herself, taking his wrath to spare me worse? The possibility ached, but so did the pain of her deception, a tether to a past I'd fought to escape. The attic's silence pressed against me, heavy as the house itself, and I left with the letters clutched in my hands, their weight a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. The letters sat on my desk for days, their edges curling in the dim light of my apartment, each word a shard that cut deeper than I'd expected. Holding them, I felt the sting of Claire's treachery, a wound that pulled me back to the child who shivered in the garage, waiting for a sister who never fully came. My body remembered the fear, the cold, the way my breath caught when my father's voice rose. Therapy had taught me that trauma lingers, a ghost in the bones, resurfacing in sleepless nights and racing thoughts. The letters weren't just paper, they were a mirror, reflecting a past I'd spent a decade trying to outrun. Claire, my protector, my lighthouse, had stood by our father, her silence a shield for his cruelty. The truth of her disloyalty was a weight I couldn't shake, a stone lodged in my chest that made every breath feel borrowed. Yet, even as anger burned, a quieter voice whispered doubts. Claire was 17 when I was 12, barely more than a child herself, caught in the same house where love was a gamble and survival a daily negotiation. Could I judge her for choices made under that roof, where every decision carried the risk of his wrath? I saw her in my mind, her hands steady as she braided my hair, her laughter a rare gift that warmed the cold corners of our home. Those memories clashed with the letter's truth, her complicity in nights like the garage, the lamp, the closet. Was she a villain, orchestrating my pain, or a victim, scrambling to keep us both afloat? The question gnawed, a splinter I couldn't pull free. I wanted to hate her, to let rage be my anchor, but longing crept in, longing for the sister who'd slipped me candy, who'd sat with me in the dark when the world felt too heavy. My life now was a testament to resilience, a fragile but deliberate construction. Therapy had given me tools to name the scars, to build boundaries that kept the past at bay. A steady job, a partner whose love didn't demand I shrink myself, a city far from that house. These were my victories, each one a step away from the child who'd learned trust could turn to faithlessness. But the letters threatened that foundation, stirring fears I'd buried. What if reconnecting with Claire meant reopening those wounds, letting the chaos of our past seep into the peace I'd fought for? What if holding on to anger meant betraying the part of me that still loved her? Forgiveness felt like a puzzle with no edges, a choice that could either free me or unravel everything I'd built. I wondered if justice meant punishing her for her silence, or if mercy meant seeing her as a child shaped by the same storm. The addict's revelations forced me to question my own lens. Had I been too quick to cast Claire as the traitor, ignoring the weight she carried? I remembered her at 17, her face drawn as she took the blame for the broken lamp, her eyes avoiding mine as our father's voice cut through the air. Was that sacrifice, a deliberate act to shield me, or a desperate bid to keep the peace? The letters painted her as his ally, but I couldn't shake the image of her trembling hands after the garage, her pale face as she wrapped me in a blanket. Perhaps she'd been playing a role, absorbing his anger to spare me worse. The possibility ached, but so did the pain of her deception, a truth that tethered me to a past I'd worked so hard to leave behind. Could I forgive someone who'd hurt me, even if their intent was protection? Was forgiveness a gift to her, or a way to release myself from the weight of resentment? I sat with those questions, the letters a silent witness to my turmoil. Claire wasn't a monster, but neither was I. We were both products of a house that broke us in different ways, her silence a scar I couldn't ignore, my anger a shield I wasn't ready to lower. The path forward felt like a tightrope, each step a risk of falling back into the chaos or losing the sister I'd once loved. I didn't know if I could trust her again, or if trust was even the goal. Maybe healing meant holding both truths, her care and her perfidy, without letting either define me. But as I traced the letter's faded ink, I wasn't sure I was strong enough to find that balance, or if the attempt would break me all over again. Weeks after uncovering the letters, I sat in my apartment, the silence heavy, the faint hum of the city filtering through the window. Claire's number glowed on my phone, a string of digits that felt like a Pandora's box, holding truths I wasn't sure I could face. The addict's revelations had left me raw, the weight of her disloyalty a constant pressure, each letter a reminder of the sister who'd stood by our father while I paid the price. Yet the cafe encounter lingered, her hesitant posture, her eyes pleading for something I couldn't name. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling with the urge to keep her at a distance, to protect the life I'd built from the chaos she represented. But a memory surfaced, unbidden, Claire at 17, her hands steady as she braided my hair, her laughter a fleeting warmth in a house of cold. That memory, fragile but persistent, pushed me to press the call button, the phone cold against my ear, my pulse a frantic drum as it rang. Her voice, when it came, carried a tremor of hope, a warmth that clashed with the ice in my chest. I demanded to know why she'd helped our father, my words sharp, honed by years of buried pain. She faltered, her explanation spilling out in a rush, her youth, her fear, her belief that her silence would shield me from worse. She described the garage night, her desperation to calm him, her shame at failing to stop his cruelty. Her words were earnest, but they landed like ash, too frail to mend the scars her perfidy had left. The letters loomed in my mind, their inked deceptions a wall between us, each one a testament to the night she'd chosen silence over my safety. I pressed her further, my voice steady despite the storm inside, asking how she could justify standing by him, whispering in his study while I faced his wrath alone. She pleaded for a chance to meet face to face, to explain what the letters couldn't capture. My instincts screamed to refuse, to hold fast to the boundaries I'd fought for, but a flicker of the sister who'd sat with me in the closet, her presence a shield against the dark, pulled me toward her. Against my better judgment, I agreed, setting a time and place, my heart a battlefield of dread, anger, and a longing I couldn't suppress. The diner was a time capsule, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow, the air thick with the scent of grease and burnt coffee. I chose a booth in the corner, my fingers tracing the cracked vinyl, my eyes fixed on the door as rain streaked the windows outside. My chest tightened, each breath a conscious effort, as memories of our childhood flooded back, the garage's cold, the lamp's crash, the closet's suffocating dark. Therapy had taught me to name these feelings, to recognize the trauma that lingered in my body, but naming it didn't dull its edge. Claire arrived, her coat damp, her steps hesitant, her face drawn as she slid into the seat across from me. Her eyes, red-rimmed and searching, met mine, and I felt a jolt, as if the child I'd been was staring back, waiting for her to make things right. Her hands, unsteady, twisted a napkin, shredding it as she began to speak, her voice low, her words a torrent of remorse and explanation. She described her life at 17, a teenager trapped in a house where every choice carried the risk of our father's rage. She spoke of her attempts to keep him calm, believing her silence would prevent his violence from escalating, sparing me the worst of his cruelty. She recounted the garage night, her voice breaking as she described begging him to let me in, her powerlessness when he refused. She admitted her role in hiding his actions, her shame at upholding the family's facade, her hope that her sacrifices, taking his anger, shouldering his blame, had protected me in ways I couldn't see. Her words were raw, her regret palpable, but they clashed with the letter's truth, their cold evidence of her complicity. I watched her closely, noting the tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight she couldn't shed. Part of me wanted to believe her, to see the sister who'd slipped me candy, who'd sat with me in silence when the world felt too heavy. But the scars of her deception were too deep, each memory of her silence a fresh wound, the school humiliation, the counselor's dismissal, the nights I'd faced alone. My body tensed, my fist clenching under the table as I grappled with her words. I told her how her actions had shaped me, how her silence had left me to bear the brunt of our father's cruelty, how the letters had shattered the trust I'd once placed in her. My voice was steady, but inside, I was unraveling, torn between the urge to lash out and the ache to reach across the table, to reclaim the sister I'd loved. I described the garage, the cold that had seeped into my bones, the way I'd waited for her to save me, only to learn she'd helped hide that night. I spoke of the lamp incident, how I believed her sacrifice was love, only to question it in the attic's harsh light. Her face crumpled, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide, her hands stilling as she absorbed my words. Her remorse seemed genuine, a raw wound laid bare, but I couldn't trust it, not when trust had been broken by her duplicity so long ago. The diner's hum faded, the world narrowing to the space between us, a chasm filled with pain, regret, and the ghost of who we'd been. I told her I needed space, perhaps forever, to protect the life I'd built from the chaos she represented. The words felt like a blade, cutting through the fragile thread that still connected us. I explained that my healing, hard-won through years of therapy and distance, was too precious to risk, that her presence threatened to pull me back into the storm I'd escaped. She listened, her gaze dropping to the shredded napkin, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of my decision pressed her down. I stood, my legs heavy, my chest tight with a mix of resolve and sorrow. The door's bell jangled as I left, a sharp note that echoed the hollowness in my heart. Stepping into the rain, I felt a surge of power, a reclaiming of the boundaries I'd fought for, but also a void, as if I'd left a piece of myself in that booth, sitting across from the sister I'd once worshipped. Driving home, the rain streaking my windshield, I replayed the encounter, my mind a tangle of her trembling hands, her broken remorse, and the letter's unyielding truth. The city blurred past, its light smearing into streaks of color, and I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. Had I been too harsh, casting her as the villain to shield myself from the pain of our shared past? Her explanations, her youth, her fear, her attempts to protect me, echoed in my mind, clashing with the letter's cold evidence. I thought of her at 17, taking the blame for the broken lamp, her face pale after the garage, and wondered if she'd been sacrificing herself in ways I hadn't seen. The possibility gnawed, a splinter I couldn't pull free. Had I punished her for surviving the only way she knew how, or had I protected myself from a truth too messy to hold? Therapy had taught me that trauma distorts, that pain can blind us to others' struggles, but knowing that didn't ease the ache. I'd chosen distance to safeguard my healing, but the cost was a lingering doubt, a question of whether I'd closed the door on a sister who'd tried to save me. Back in my apartment, the silence was deafening, the letters still on my desk, their edges curling like a wound that refused to heal. I sat, staring at the rain beyond the window, my heart heavy with the weight of my choice. The confrontation hadn't brought closure, only a deeper tangle of questions about Claire's motives, my own biases, and the fragile line between justice and mercy. I'd walked away to protect myself, but the act felt less like freedom and more like loss, a severance of the last tie to the sister who'd once been my world. The night stretched on, and I wondered if I'd made the right choice, or if the truth of Claire's heart was still waiting, hidden in the shadows of our past, for me to find the courage to face it. 2 weeks after the diner, I sat in my apartment, the quiet heavy, the city's distant hum of faint pulse beyond the window. The glow of my laptop screen cast shadows across the room, its light cold against the warmth of the coffee I clutched, its steam curling like a ghost. An email from Claire waited, unopened, its subject line a simple "Please read." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling with a mix of dread and curiosity, my pulse quickening as if the click could unravel the fragile piece I'd built. The diner's memory lingered, her red-rimmed eyes, her hand shredding a napkin, her remorse clashing with the letter's cold truth. I'd walked away, choosing distance to protect my healing, but her presence still tugged at me, a thread tied to the sister who'd once braided my hair, who'd sat with me in the closet's dark. I opened the email, my breath catching, and her words spilled across the screen, each one a fault line splitting the narrative I'd clung to. Claire revealed a truth she'd been too ashamed to share in person, a confession that reframed our past. Those nights she'd appeared to side with our father, standing silent in his study or nodding as he ranted, she'd been absorbing his anger to spare me. She'd fabricate mistakes, spilled coffee, a forgotten chore, claiming responsibility so his rage would fall on her instead of me. The garage night, when I'd shivered alone, my breath fogging the window, she'd pleaded with him to let me back inside, her voice breaking against his refusal. When he wouldn't relent, she'd sat outside in the cold, hidden behind the shed, her own breath clouding the air, ensuring I wasn't entirely alone. At 17, she'd played a desperate game, balancing her own survival with her need to protect me, each choice a gamble in a house that offered no mercy. The lamp incident, when she'd taken the blame for my clumsiness, wasn't a strategy for his favor but a deliberate act to shield me from his wrath. Other moments, too, surfaced in her words, nights she'd lingered by his side to deflect his mood, mornings she'd whispered apologies I'd never heard, her silence a sacrifice she'd carried alone. My hand shook as I read, the coffee forgotten, the letters on my desk suddenly incomplete, their faded ink a half-truth I'd mistaken for the whole. The sister I'd condemned as disloyal wasn't that she was a child, caught in the same storm, her actions a flawed attempt to save me. Yet the pain she'd caused was real, a wound that had shaped my life, my trust, my sense of self. The garage's cold still lingered in my bones, the humiliation at school, the counselor's dismissal, moments her silence had failed to prevent, moments I'd carried alone. I stood, pacing the apartment, my thoughts a tangle of shock, guilt, and a rekindled ache. The email was a shattered mirror, reflecting a past I'd misread, and I saw Claire anew. Her pale face after the garage, her trembling hands wrapping me in a blanket, her laughter when she slipped me candy, now heavy with the weight of her unseen battles. I returned to the letters, spreading them across the desk, their words once a verdict now a question. They praised her silence, but not as complicity, perhaps as survival, a role she'd played to keep us both afloat. Therapy had taught me trauma distorts, that pain can blind us to others' struggles, and I wondered if I'd been too quick to judge her, casting her as the villain to make sense of my scars. At 17, was she an enabler or a victim? Her choices shaped by a house that broke us both? The email hinted at her own trauma, the toll of absorbing his rage, the shame that had silenced her at the diner. Yet intent didn't erase impact. The nights I'd faced alone, the trust her duplicity had shattered. I sat, the room dimming as dusk settled, my mind wrestling with the math of pain and sacrifice. Could I honor her efforts without dismissing my suffering? Was her heart's truth enough to mend what her silence had broken? The revelation left me raw, my sleep fractured by dreams of the garage, Claire's shadow outside, unseen. I thought of the diner, her crumpled face, and wondered what else she hadn't said, what other truths lay buried. The walls I'd built, years of anger, distance, boundaries, were crumbling, but rebuilding trust felt like a bridge too far, its supports untested. I hadn't responded to her email, hadn't found the words to navigate this new truth. Part of me ached to reach out, to hold the sister who'd tried to save me, but another part clung to the safety of distance, fearing the chaos her presence might stir. The letters and email lay side by side, a map of our shared history, and I sat with their contradictions, unsure if I could move forward or if the past would always hold me back. The city hummed outside, and I felt the weight of time, a quiet demand to choose, between reconnection and retreat, between her sacrifice and my pain. Days after Claire's email, I sat at my desk, the letters and her words spread before me, their edges touching like a wound ended south. The apartment was quiet, the city's hum a distant pulse, but inside me, a storm raged, longing clashing with fear, hope tangled with pain. I hadn't responded to her, hadn't found the words to bridge the chasm her revelation had widened. I'd informed Claire I required time, a boundary to safeguard my healing, but her truth had shifted the ground beneath me, stirring memories of her laughter, her trembling hands, her silent vigil outside the garage. The sister I'd once worshipped, then condemned for her duplicity, was neither villain nor savior, just a girl, broken by the same house that had shaped me, trying to save us both in ways I hadn't seen. Yet the scars of her silence remained, a tide that surged in sleepless nights, pulling me back to the garage's cold, the lamps crash, the closets dark. I walked the city at dusk, the air sharp with winter's edge, my breath clouding like it had against the garage window years ago. The rhythm of my steps anchored me, a counterpoint to the chaos in my heart. Therapy had taught me that trauma lingers, a ghost that reshapes trust, love, and forgiveness. Claire's email had cracked open both pain and possibility, forcing me to reckon with the child I'd been and the woman I'd become. I saw her at 17, braiding my hair, her fingers gentle, her laughter a rare gift in a house of dread. I saw her outside the garage, hidden, her own breath fogging the air, a sacrifice I'd never known. Those moments, once tainted by her perfidy, now carried a dual truth, her care and her failure, her love and my loss. But the pain she'd caused was real, the nights I'd faced alone, the trust shattered by her silence, and I couldn't erase the years I'd spent rebuilding, learning to value myself beyond the wounds she'd helped inflict. In therapy, I journaled, my pen tracing questions without answers. What was forgiveness? To release the past, or to welcome Claire back into my life? Could I honor her sacrifices without dismissing my suffering? I thought of the diner, her red-rimmed eyes, her hands shredding a napkin as she bared her regret. I thought of her email, her confession of sitting in the cold, a vigil I'd never sensed. She wasn't a monster, nor was I. We were both forged in a house that offered no easy choices, her silence a flawed shield, my distance a necessary armor. I wondered if I'd judged her too harshly, casting her as disloyal to make sense of my pain, or if my caution now was a failure to trust my own strength. The questions piled like stones, heavy but unshifting, and I carried them, unsure if they'd ever settle. My life now, my job, my partner, my city, was a testament to resilience, a world I'd built to keep the past at bay. Claire's email threatened that foundation, not with chaos, but with a fragile hope. Part of me yearned to reach out, to embrace the sister who'd tried to save me, to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part, honed by therapy and time, demanded boundaries, wary of the pain her presence might stir. I sat with the letters one evening, their faded ink a map of our history, and traced the words that had once defined her as an accomplice. Now, they stood alongside her email, incomplete without her truth. Forgiveness wasn't a door to fling open, but a bridge, fragile and untested, and I wasn't sure I could cross it. Yet healing, I'd learned, was holding both truths, her care and her duplicity, my love and my pain, without letting them define me. I didn't know if I'd see Claire again, didn't know if trust could be rebuilt, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of possibility, a sense that the door between us wasn't locked forever. The city hummed outside, And I sat with that uncertainty, letting it settle like dust, a quiet promise that healing, however messy, was still within reach. What would you do if the person who hurt you was also trying to save you? Does their intent change the weight of the pain, or is the damage too deep to mend?